This was me. August 2023, 22 years old, wandering the streets of Edinburgh in the middle of a manic episode. I hadn't slept for 2 weeks. I was going out every night, drinking, taking drugs, meeting strangers, rushing from show to show. A lot of it felt incredible, but when I came home, everything fell apart. I was arguing with my family, I was ringing up exes, I was cramming my day with as much activity as possible. I was convinced people were lying to me, and I was doing and saying things that really hurt people I cared about. Eventually, I was taken to hospital, and that's when everything changed. Hi, my name is Johnny, and welcome to Grace in the Highs and Lows. This is where we talk about the intersection between faith and mental health. Today, I'm going to tell you my story, from the manic episode that put me in hospital, to the diagnosis, to the depression after, and the one thing that got me through it all. Let's go back to the beginning. Bipolar disorder didn't come out of nowhere. Looking back through my teens, there were definitely signs. I'd have periods of excessive energy, staying up late, making plans, and feeling really good. And other weeks, I genuinely couldn't get out of bed. And I didn't know what was happening to me. I thought this was just me, this is just how I'm wired. But everything came to a head when I was 22 and in Edinburgh. I was becoming irritable and argumentative, and I was saying really hurtful stuff to the people I cared most about. Then I was finally taken to hospital. I was still manic when I arrived. I still didn't really understand what I was doing there, and I thought I was absolutely fine. Then I began writing notes to people on the ward, smoking way too much, trying to chat to everyone I could meet. I didn't appreciate at the time just how traumatic it was for my family and friends when I was in hospital. I also did some generally quite strange things when I was there. I posted really odd stuff on Instagram. I wrote reams of rap lyrics and song lyrics. I was convinced I was going to be a famous musician or comedian. I even asked people to call me by a different name. And I even started evangelizing to a very famous Buddhist monk who was in the bed opposite me. No joke, that's 100% true. It was in a hospital that I first heard the words bipolar disorder. I was initially told that I had had a hypermanic episode, which is less severe than a manic episode. I later found out from my psychiatrist that this wasn't actually true, that I had had a full-on manic episode. After hearing all this and being diagnosed with bipolar disorder, I went down a massive rabbit hole, Googling everything and staying up late at night and reading loads of stuff. But because I was still manic, the seriousness of it didn't fully register with me. I was put on olanzapine, which managed the high. After a couple of weeks, I was moved to another hospital where I met my psychiatrist, and I had more therapy and eventually was discharged. I moved back to Oxford and deferred my place at drama school for a year. I started working at a cinema as well as getting more involved in the church that I was going to at the time. And then a few months later, heading into winter, I fell into a deep depression. I remember one morning really clearly. I had woken up and I had just crashed. I felt like I had nothing to give. I was completely demotivated and really down and really tearful. I rang my mum and asked her to pick me up and take me home. I hadn't been home since leaving hospital, and I'd barely spoken to my mum since being discharged, but she came and she picked me up and took me home. And that's when recovery really started for me. The contrast to how I'd felt in the summer and to how I was feeling now was completely different. It was almost impossible to make sense of. From feeling basically invincible to feeling nothing at all. It was a really scary time in my life. And that's the reality of bipolar that no one really talks about. The crash is as extreme as the highs, but it's not nearly romanticized as much. I stayed at home for a while, barely leaving the house. But I did start to recover. Eventually, by the beginning of 2024, I started feeling a lot more like myself again. But something happened in that hospital that changed the course of my life. For some reason, when I was going to hospital, the only thing I brought with me was my dad's old Good News Bible from Johannesburg, where he grew up. This is that Bible, and it's even got my hospital tag as a bookmark in it. The doctors noticed this Bible and encouraged me to talk to the chaplain that was working in the hospital. Her name was Vanessa, and she had a lopsided haircut and bright coloured glasses, and she was possibly one of the nicest people I'd ever met. Now, Vanessa told me about Jesus, Not the version of Jesus that I'd grown up thinking was true, but the real Jesus. She told me about his love, his grace, his work on the cross, and his power to forgive. It was the forgiveness that really stuck with me. At that point, I realised how much I'd hurt people during my manic episode. I realised how much guilt and shame I carried with me, but Vanessa showed me how Christ changes all of that. Most people around me assumed it was the mania, just something I picked up when I was unwell, something that would fade, but it was the most real thing I have ever experienced. But that's a bigger story, and I'll tell it properly in another video. But I wanted you to know that's where it started, in a hospital bed, with my dad's old Bible. That's where Christ met me and changed my life. If any of this sounds familiar and you're in your own version of this story, I want you to know that you are not alone. This channel exists because I believe Jesus meets us in the highs and lows, and I want to talk honestly about what that looks like. But before I go, I'd love to share a verse. This is from Philippians 4, and it's verse 7. And the peace of God which transcends all understanding will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.